Bartlett's Math Magicians. Today we will be multiplying fractions with an area model. Area model is not a new phrase in fifth grade. We've been using area models for a couple of years now. So here is our standard 5.NFB4 if you want to look the standard up more in depthly. So there's different elements to this standard. So we can multiply fractions times whole numbers. There's tiling involved with this standard. So the standard is actually pretty in-depth once you start reading it and unpacking it. So I'm only focusing on a little section of that standard right now, which is multiplying fractions using area models. So we first started area in third grade when we're finding the area of a square or a rectangle. We have a length of 4, a width of 4. Then we know the area inside is 16. Fourth grade, we were doing multi-digit numbers, 12 times 4. We would break apart the 12. And then in fifth grade, you're using larger multi-digit numbers, but then we're also using fractions. So as I said before, this standard has lots of different elements to teach. So I talk about fractions times whole numbers first. And just to give a little quick recap of what models look like, we've talked about two kinds of models: part of a group, and I'm going to abbreviate, equal groups. That's what we've talked about with fractions times whole numbers. Part of a group would look like, I have a group here, I'm looking for half of that, so I shade in 1/2. How much goes in each group? Well, 1 goes in each group, so 1/2 times 2 is 1. The other example would be equal groups. I have two groups of 1/2. Again, everything is just kind of based on context of a word problem, and that's a whole. So now we are doing fraction times a fraction. So I am going to use 1/2 times 1/2 because halves are what we all are most familiar with. So I'm going to put it in context. I have a half a cake and I'm going to eat half of the half. So I am going to draw my cake. So I'm going to draw a square because my factors are the same. So I know all sides are going to be equal. But here's my cake and I eat half of the cake. Well, I have half of the cake first. So here is the half cake. For me, this section right here is the cake that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and shade this in. I'm going to shade it in one direction, and we'll see why in just a second. So let's talk about the length. So the length of the whole cake here is 1. But the length that I'm focused on is the half that I actually have. Now we know the other part is a half because a half and a half make a whole. So if we talk about the width is going to represent the portion that I ate. So right now we have the portion that I have. Now we're going to talk about the half that I'm going to eat. So what do you think you would want to do with this half a cake if I said I ate half of it? Yeah, you would want to cut it in half. So I'm going to cut this cake in half and label a half and a half. So this I'm labeling eat the part that I eat. So I'm going to shade this as well, but I'm going to shade in the opposite direction. And we'll see what happens after I do that. So I'm going to shade all the way across the entire row. And I notice that they overlap. My lines intersect, or cross-hatched is a word that is often used. And I see, okay, I had a half a cake. I ate half of it. So the part that I have is 1/4. I ate 1/4 of the cake. I had a half a cake. I ate half of the half. So I ate 1/4 of the cake. So a half times a half is a 4th. Quickly noticing both of my factors are less than 1. What do you also notice about the product? It is also less than 1, which we'll talk about more in depth when we get to scaling. But those are some kind of things that I want you to pick up on and notice as we go along with some examples. So I'm going to do a couple of more examples. Let's do 1/3 times a half. So again, I'm going to use my same half of a cake. So I have half of a cake, and I'm drawing my model pretty big so you can see it. So I have half of a cake. This is the part that I have, shading in one direction. I'm going to eat a third of that. So what would I need to do to this half? I would need to cut it into thirds. So here is my thirds. Again, labeling everything. Labeling is so important, especially because the next part when we do tiling, these labels are really, really important. So this is the part that I eat. This whole section is the part cake equals me, part that I have. And so I eat a third of the cake. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in the entire row in the opposite direction, noticing that my lines have intersected. And since I ate a third of the half, I ate 1 out of the 6. So there's 1/6. I ate 1/6 of the cake. Noticing again, my factors are less than 1. So what are you noticing again about the size of the product? It is also less than 1. And as you're watching these videos, if you notice anything about the size of the product related to the factors, you could be thinking about that. No, it's not part of this particular standard, but I'm all about, pulling out things that you notice, but I'm not going to talk about them in depth with this video. So when we multiply fractions, they don't have to always be unit fractions. They can be fractions that are not unit fractions. So let's talk about 2/3 times 2/4. So again, I have 2/4 of, we'll just say bread. Let's use a bread. I have 2/4 of a loaf of bread. Labeling. This is me, the bread that I have. Then I'm going to eat 2/3 of the 2/4 that I have. So again, I need to cut this into thirds. And then labeling, so important, labeling. I ate 2/3 of it. So here's 1/3, shading in the opposite direction all the way across. Here's the second third, shading in all the way across. Noticing how I'm like defining my space, my area. So if I had a pencil, I could define that in, or if I had a highlighter, I could define that. So how much is double shaded? 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 12 total. 4/12. I ate 4/12 of the bread. So this is just an example of multiplying fractions by using an area model. Here is our standard, 5NFB4. And noticing that when we shade the opposite direction, our products are shown by this cross hatching. And again, we'll talk more about we can build this actually when we talk about tiling in a couple of the next videos. But I just wanted to hop on here and show you multiplying fractions with an area model. So thanks for stopping by.